The Enogi of Owa Idogbe did not tell his 4 sons why they were being summoned to judge a prisoner. He only knew that whichever one flinched first would not be wearing the coral. He sat under the veranda of his father's old reception hall, the one with the carved python posts, and he was smiling. Not the smile of a man about to watch his sons perform for him, the smile of a man who had already finished a piece of work and was only waiting for other people to notice. Osaritin arrived first, still in his trade wrapper from the trade road, dust on his ankles. Aigbe came next, in his captain's beads, already glancing toward the storeroom where the guard stood. Osayande came late and apologizing as always. Ikbom Mwasa, the last born, came without being called twice and did not ask what the matter was. He already knew there was a prisoner. He had known for 9 days. None of the 4 brothers knew that the man kneeling in the storeroom, wrists tied with the same cord used to bind yam bundles, had spent the last 9 nights learning something about each of them that their own father did not know he'd told him. 9 days earlier, the prisoner was caught behind the strong room a little after the 2nd cock crow, not stealing, not running, just standing with his hand flat against the wall like a man reading a letter through his palm. The night guard, a boy named Efusa who had only held the spear for 3 months, did not know what to do with a thief who didn't run, so he did the only sensible thing and woke the Enugi instead of the captain of guards. That was the first mistake, though no one would call it a mistake for a long time. The Enogi came out in his sleeping cloth, no chief's beads, no attendants, and looked at the man on his knees in the dirt. He did not ask his name. He asked instead a question so quiet that Efusa, standing 3 feet away, was not sure he had heard it right. Who sent you back? Not who sent you, back. The prisoner did not answer, but something in his shoulders came down, the way a man's shoulders come down when he has been carrying a heavy basket and is finally told he can put it on the ground. The Enogi ordered the prisoner kept in the old yam store, not the guardhouse. He told no one why. He told the guards it was because the guardhouse was being repaired, though anyone who looked could see it had not needed repairing since before the last dry season. He visited the prisoner alone at night, 4 times in 9 days. Efusa, who had been given the job of standing outside the door for these visits and pretending not to listen, heard only pieces. A name, the word Iyase. Once, laughter, which frightened Efusa more than anything else could have, because his master did not laugh easily and certainly had never laughed at a prisoner. He told no one else in the compound that the prisoner had, on the first night, used the name for the Enugi that only 3 living people were supposed to know. Osaritin, the eldest, managed his father's trade caravans to the coast and had done so competently enough that no one had thought to check the ledgers in 4 years. This was on the whole a mistake belonging to everyone except Osaritin, who had been counting on exactly that kind of trust. He owed the Iyase, the chief who would confirm or refuse to confirm whichever son the Enogi eventually named, 900 manilas, not for himself, for a shipment of coral that went down with a canoe near Ugoton 2 years back, coral he had already sold on credit before it drowned. He had been paying the debt back in small, invisible pieces ever since, skimming the caravan accounts like a man skims foam from palm wine, thinking no one will miss what was never counted in the first place. If he became Enugi, the debt would not matter. And Enugi's debt became the kingdom's business, softened, folded into tribute, forgiven in the way that only power forgives itself. If he did not become Enogi, the Iyase had made it clear, without ever quite saying it, that the ledgers might suddenly need checking. Osaritin did not yet know that the prisoner in the yam store had once worked for the Iyase himself, copying those very ledgers by lampshade. Aigbe, the 2nd son, captained his father's household guard and was good at it in the particular way that men are good at jobs that ask them to be suspicious of everyone. He trusted no one, which people mistook for loyalty, when really it was only a wider net. 6 months earlier, a runner had come to the compound gate with a folded paper for the Enogi, sealed with wax and a thumbprint. Aigbe had taken it, as he took everything meant for his father, to check it for danger before it went any further. He had read it. He had not delivered it. It concerned a boundary, a stretch of farmland between Owa Idogbe and the neighboring domain, land that had belonged, to the letter said, to the Enogi's elder brother before it belonged to the Enogi. The letter used the word forged. Aigbe had folded it back on its own creases, resealed it badly with a candle stub, and put it at the bottom of a chest under his sleeping mat, where it had stayed. He told himself he was protecting his father from an old lie some jealous relative wanted resurrected. He did not examine too closely why protecting his father also meant that no one else in the compound would ever see it. He had forgotten until 9 days ago that the runner who had carried that letter had a scar along his left arm shaped like a fish hook. The prisoner in the yam store had that same scar.
Osayande, the third son, was the gentle one. In the way families always keep one son designated gentle, whether or not it is entirely true. He had spent the last 2 years quietly visiting his mother's people, a maternal family the Enogi had cut off after his mother's death, for reasons no one under 30 had ever heard explained, and no one over 30 was willing to explain. He told himself these visits were harmless, grief, nothing more. An old woman who was his mother's aunt, living 3 villages over, who fed him and asked after his brothers and cried a little every time, the way old women do. She had also, on her last visit, given him a small brass box to keep for her, somewhere the Enogi's men will never think to look, and had refused to say what was in it, only that it belonged to someone who would come for it when the time makes itself known. Osayande had put the box under a loose floor plank in his own room and had not looked inside it since, telling himself that not looking was the same as not knowing, and that not knowing was the same as being blameless. It would take 3 more days for anyone in that household to learn that the box and the prisoner had arrived more or less from the same direction. Ikpumwasa, the youngest, had a habit their father found mildly embarrassing and their brothers found simply strange. He liked to know things before he was told them. As a boy, he had learned to read the household by watching who avoided whose eyes at the evening meal. As a man, this had become his only real inheritance, since he was 4th born and stood to inherit very little else. On the 2nd night of the prisoner's captivity, Ikpumwasa had bribed Ifosa with a length of good tobacco to let him into the yam store for the length of 1 clay lamp's burning. He did not ask the prisoner who sent him. He asked him what he wanted. The prisoner had looked at him for a long moment, long enough that Ikpumwasa began to suspect the man recognized something in his face that he himself had never noticed, and said only, "The same thing your father wants, to stop pretending the ground under this house is solid." Ikpumwasa did not understand this. He wrote it down anyway on the back of a trade tally in the small, cramped hand he intended to remember and never mention. By the 5th day, the story moving through the compound's kitchens and grain stores had settled into something everyone agreed on, which is usually the first sign a story is wrong. The story was this: the prisoner was a spy sent by the Enogi of the neighboring domain to steal the boundary papers kept in the strongroom, papers that would prove once and for all which family's ancestors had first cleared that stretch of farmland between the 2 territories. A land dispute decades old, flaring up the way old land disputes do, usually right before a harvest. It was a good story. It explained the strongroom, it explained the Enogi's caution, it even explained, if you squinted, the prisoner's calm, since spies are trained men, and trained men do not panic easily. The women who ground pepper in the kitchen court repeated it to each other with the particular satisfaction people take in explanations that ask nothing further of them. It was, as it turned out, almost entirely wrong, but it would take the arrival of a second visitor 4 days later to begin unmaking it. The second visitor came at dusk, on foot, with no attendants and a walking stick worn smooth on one side from years of the same hand. She was old enough that no one at the gate thought to stop her, which was itself a kind of mistake, since the gate guards had been trained to distrust exactly the kind of person who looks too harmless to distrust. She asked for the Enugi by a name his own household chiefs no longer used. She asked to see the boy in the yam house. When Ifosa, confused, said there was no boy, only a grown man, she made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. To me, she said, he will always be the boy. She was let in eventually because the Enogi, informed of her arrival, came to the gate himself rather than send a servant, which every chief in the compound noted and none of them understood. What none of them knew yet was that she was the sister of the Enogi's own elder brother, the brothers whose name had not been spoken inside that compound in almost 30 years, and whose farmland, according to a letter still folded badly at the bottom of a chest under Aigbe's sleeping mat, the current Enogi had never actually inherited so much as taken.
3 days before the trial, the old woman stayed in the guest quarters, usually reserved for chiefs from allied domains, which unsettled the household further, since prisoners' relatives are not typically housed like visiting royalty. She spoke to no one but the Enogi, and only at night, and only with the door shut. It was Ikpomoswa who walked out before anyone else what the household had gotten wrong about the story it had settled on. He did it the way he did everything, by watching who avoided whose eyes. He noticed that his father, usually a man who ate with his chiefs and made a show of ordinary life even during difficult weeks, had stopped eating with anyone at all. He noticed that Aigbe had begun sleeping badly, and that a chest under his mat, usually locked, had recently been unlocked and relocked in a hurry, the latch left slightly crooked. He noticed that Osayonde visited his room more often than usual during the day for no obvious reason, and that a particular floorboard near his sleeping mat had fresh scuff marks where none had been before. He did not yet know what any of these things meant separately. All he knew, the way he had always known things, was that they were all pointing at the same buried object from different directions, the way animal tracks around a single water hole all lead eventually to water. What he believed for one full day was the second wrong conclusion the household would reach, that the prisoner was in fact the Enogi's own son from before his marriage, an old scandal, an early mistake, a boy sent away and now claimed what he felt owed to him. It was a good guess. It explained the old woman's tenderness. It explained the Enogi's private visits. It was also wrong, though it would take Ikpomoswa one more conversation and one more sleepless night to be told so. He went back to the yam store the 8th night, without tobacco this time, because Efosa no longer needed paying to look away. "You are not his son," Ikpomoswa said, sitting on an overturned yam basket across from the prisoner, the way another man might sit across a gaming board. The prisoner, whose name Ikpomoswa still did not know, smiled for the first time since his capture. "No," he said. "I used to work for the men who wrote down what your grandfather owned. Ledgers, boundary marks. I copied the old land papers before anyone thought to burn them. And now? Now I brought one of the copies back, the one your father's household has spent 30 years pretending never existed." Ikpomoswa sat with that for a while in the dark, listening to a lamp gutter. "My father is not a thief," he said, though even as he said it, he was aware that it sounded like a question. The prisoner did not answer that directly. What he said instead was the sentence Ikpomoswa would carry into the trial 3 days later, the sentence that would end up mattering more than anything either of his brothers said in that room. "Your father is not being tried tomorrow. You four are. He only wants to see which of you already knows that." The morning of the trial, the Enogi sat under the veranda with the carved python posts, in full coral, the layered beads that only a ruling chief was permitted to wear, red as old blood, heavy enough to bow a lesser man's neck. He had not worn them over a year. Their weight that morning seemed to please him. The 4 sons stood in a row, as their father had ordered, in the order of their birth. Behind them, at a careful distance, stood the Iyase, arms folded, watching Osaretin the way a creditor watches a debtor who has just been handed unexpected good fortune. Beside the Iyase was Aigbe's second in command, holding, though no one in the family yet knew it, a folded and badly resealed letter that Aigbe had finally, at 4 that morning, decided to burn,
and then, at the last possible second, decided not to. The old woman sat apart from everyone, on a low stool brought out especially for her, her walking stick across her knees, watching the proceedings with the patient, unhurried attention of someone who has already read the last page of his story and is only curious to see how the middle turns out. The prisoner was brought out and made to kneel in the center of the courtyard in the sun, his wrists still bound by yam cord because no one had thought in 9 days to find better rope. The Inogi spoke first and only once. "A man was caught inside my walls at night, doing nothing but standing with his hand against a wall that was not his to touch. My sons will each tell me what should be done with him. I will listen, and I will name my heir by what I hear." He did not say what crime the man had committed. No one asked. This, more than anything, should have told the 4 brothers something about the nature of the test they were standing inside.
Osaretin spoke first, as the eldest was entitled to. He had spent the last 3 nights composing his answer the way a caravan master plans a route, for safety, not for truth. "Execute him," Osaretin said, and his voice did not shake, which he had practiced. A stranger caught at night near the strongroom, silent, offering no name, no reason. Such a man is a danger simply by continuing to exist. Mercy toward him is carelessness toward everyone else inside these walls. A ruler who cannot end a threat quickly is not a ruler people will trust with larger dangers. It was, on its surface, a reasonable judgment. Several of the older chiefs nodded, the way older chiefs nod at anything delivered with confidence. What Osaretin did not say, and would never say aloud to anyone, was that a dead man cannot testify about ledgers, and a dead man cannot be asked by the Iyase or anyone else exactly which caravan accounts he once helped falsify on behalf of a young trade master eager to cover a lost shipment of coral. The Enugi's face did not change. He only said, "Noted," the way a man notes rain when he has already decided to travel regardless. Aigbe spoke second. He had spent those same 3 nights not composing an answer, but weighing a decision about a folded letter, and had arrived at the trial with the letter still unburnt, still hidden, and a judgment he believed was cleverer than his brothers. "Do not execute him blindly," he said. "A man who enters silently and says nothing is not simply dangerous, he is holding something back. Before we decide his fate, we should learn what he knows, question him properly. If necessary, make the questioning severe enough that silence becomes more costly to him than speech." Torture, dressed as due diligence. Several of the chiefs murmured approval at this too, since it had the shape of caution, which people often mistake for wisdom. What Aigbe did not say was that he already suspected, more than suspected, what the prisoner would say under pressure, because a fishhook scar does not belong to 2 different men, and a runner does not simply forget the letter he once carried. What he wanted more than the throne itself in that moment was to be the one holding the questions rather than the one about to be questioned. The Enogi's eyes moved briefly to Aigbe's second-in-command, to the folded paper visible at the edge of his hand, and something crossed the Enogi's face that was not quite surprise. He had known about the letter longer than Aigbe imagined. He said nothing about it yet. He said, "Noted," in the same flat voice. Osayondi spoke third, and here the old woman on her stool sat forward slightly, the first movement she had made all morning. Osayonde had not slept at all the previous night. He had lain awake with a brass box under his floorboard and a guilt he could not name pressing on his chest like a stone laid there by someone else's hand. Osayonde said, "Let him go," and his voice, unlike his brothers, did shake. "We do not know his crime. We were never told it. A man should not be executed, and certainly not tortured for a wrong none of us can even name. Free him. Ask nothing more. Whatever he came for, let him leave with it, and let this end quietly." It sounded like mercy, Several of the younger household women, listening beyond the courtyard wall, would later say it was the kindest of the three answers, and in a narrow sense, they were right. But it was also, and the old woman on the stool saw this immediately, a judgment built entirely out of not wanting to know. Osayonde did not ask what the man came for because he was afraid of what the brass box under his own floor would turn out to mean if he did. His mercy was real. It was also, underneath, a kind of cowardice wearing mercy's clothes, and there is a particular kind of person who can always tell the difference between the two, and she was sitting 3 feet away on a borrowed stool. The Enogi looked at his third son for slightly longer than he had looked at the other two. Noted, he said, and this time there was something almost like sadness in it. Then he looked at Ikpomosa and waited. The fourth son did not step forward the way his brothers had. He stood where he was, in the shade of the veranda post, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, which disquieted the courtyard more than the 3 judgments already given, because silence from the son least expected to have an opinion is its own kind of announcement. What none of the assembled chiefs knew, what even Osaretin, Aigbe, and Osayonde did not yet know, was that Ikpomosa had spent the last 2 nights not composing a judgment, but writing in his small cramped hand on the back of an old trade tally a single question. He had crossed it out 4 times and written it a 5th. "I will not judge him," Ikpomosa said finally. A ripple went through the chiefs. The Iyase's arms unfolded slightly. Even the old woman's grip on her walking stick tightened, though whether from disappointment or anticipation, no one watching could have said. "I was told to judge him," Ikpomosa went on, "but I do not know his crime, the same as my brother said. Unlike my brother, I do not think the answer to not knowing is to free him. I think the answer is to ask the only person in this courtyard who has known since before any of us were called out here this morning exactly what this man did and why he was really caught behind that wall." He turned then from the prisoner and looked instead at his father. "What did he take that you did not want found? And whose land was it before it was yours to give any of us?" The courtyard did not move for what felt like for everyone standing in it a very long time. It was the old woman who broke the silence, not the Enogi. She rose from her stool, slower than her age required, as though she had been waiting 30 years for exactly the right moment to stand up, and said in a voice pitched to carry to every corner of that courtyard, "The boy asks the only honest question anyone in this family has asked in 30 decades.
The Enogi did not answer her. He looked instead at the prisoner still kneeling in the dirt, and something passed between the 2 men that had nothing to do with punishment, because punishment, it was now plain to everyone watching, had never really been the subject of that morning's trial. He copied, the Enogi said at last, slowly, as though each word cost him something he had been saving for a long time. "A paper my father made me sign the week my elder brother died. A boundary paper. It said the western farmland had always been mine, cleared by my hands, by my father's hands, never my brother's." He paused. "It was not true. My brother cleared it. I signed anyway because I wanted it, and because there was no one left alive to say otherwise. I believed there was no one left alive to say otherwise." He looked at the old woman, except his sister and the clerk who copied the paper before it was rewritten. The prisoner, still kneeling, said nothing. He did not need to. His silence, for the first time since Efotha had found him standing with his hand flat against the wall, was no longer the silence of a man who has been captured. It was the silence of a man who has finished the only job he had come to do. What none of the 4 brothers had understood, standing in that courtyard, was that the trial had never been about the prisoner at all. The prisoner had simply been the instrument, the loose thread the old woman had sent, quietly, months earlier, to be caught exactly where he was, so that the question of the family's land would finally be forced into a room the Enogi could not leave.
The Iyase's judgment would have buried the thread along with the man holding it. Aige's judgment would have torn the thread out under duress and then hidden what it led to, the way he had already hidden a litter for 6 months. Osayande's judgment would have let the thread go loose again, unresolved, so that his own guilt over the brass box could remain comfortably unexamined a while longer. Only Ikponmosa had pulled it to the one place none of them wanted to look. The Iyase, watching Osaritin's face go the color of old ash, understood at that moment that 900 Manilas of debt were about to be the least of anyone's concerns in that household. He said nothing. He had not survived 30 years as a kingmaker by speaking before it served him. Later that same day, the Anogi did not announce his heir that afternoon. He sent the chiefs home, unusually early for such gatherings, and had the prisoner untied and fed in the kitchen court rather than the yam store, an instruction that made Efusa, still standing guard over nothing in particular, deeply confused about what exactly he had been guarding for 9 days. He called his sons to him one at a time that evening, not together. What he said to each of them, no servant overheard, though the household would spend weeks afterwards reconstructing bases from the length of each conversation and the look on each son's face when he came out. Osaritin came out first and went straight to the trade office and was seen an hour later burning something in the small brazier kept there for sealing wax, though what exactly he burnt no one could say for certain, only that it was more paper than sealing a letter would require. Aige came out second, carrying a folded, badly resealed letter, and walked directly to his father's private quarters and left it there himself this time, on the low table, unhidden, before anyone could ask what it was. Osayande came out third and went to his own room and was heard very late that night prying up a loose floorboard, and was seen the next morning walking the 3 villages towards his mother's people, carrying a small brass box he had at last decided to open before delivering. Ikponmosa came out last and did not go anywhere in particular. He sat on the veranda step where the trial had happened that morning, in the place where the prisoner had knelt, long after the sun had gone down, and Efosa, off duty now and unsure why he still felt responsible for watching, sat down a little distance from him without being asked. "Did he tell you who the heir will be?" Efosa asked, because he was young enough to still ask direct questions out loud. Ikponmosa did not answer that directly either. He only said, looking at the dark shape of the strong room across the courtyard, "He told me the paper is still there, the real one. My grandfather never destroyed it. He only hid it, the way everyone in this compound hides the thing they can't quite bring to burn." Somewhere past the compound wall, a woman's voice rose in the ordinary way of evening, someone calling a child in for the night, someone else laughing at something no one would remember by morning. Inside the walls, the coral beads sat where the Anogi had left them, folded on a low stool, catching what little lamplight came through the shutters, red as something that had been buried a very long time and had only just been asked politely to come back up into the air.